be prudent, be frugal, go for a balanced budget or a surplus budget is what Chanakya meant. That means the revenue should be more than the expenditure. From another luminary of the west, of the east, Charvak said, Rinam kritva ghritam pibet, which means life should be lived well, even if you have to take a loan, drink ghee or eat butter. This is what Charvak said. And many centuries after that, Keynes also resonated with a similar thought. Keynes said that to advance and progress, a nation should be spending more than it earns, because that galvanizes the system, also pushes welfare measures, and reduces the friction which can happen because of too much inequality.
So very happy to see the fraternity join in. Welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone and our distinguished keynote speaker, who was handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom are CEOs and CXOs and senior leaders, many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for business leaders that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities, such as e-mobility, energy, real estate, healthcare, logistics, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 10,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access to opportunities across these sectors. Those leaders among you who are interested, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section and will soon be sending out invitations to our new guests. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. Pavan Choudary. He's the chairman of Blue Circle, best-selling author, CEO, business intellectual, trustee with Bharatiya Videsh Niti Parishad, and sits on several prestigious boards across sectors. And for today's topic, Mr. Pavan Choudary will be discussing budget highlights and its essence. Now, I request Mr. Choudary to please begin the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gautam. And it's a pleasure to be with you all to speak about the annual pot boiler. It has come, though we'll have to see how sharply the pot is boiling. And if it is not perceptible, the boil is not perceptible, is there something else in the budget which is worth commending? So let me begin by saying that from the eastern side, Chanakya said that be careful of the expenditure which you make. He was advising the king. Be prudent, be frugal, go for a balanced budget or a surplus budget is what Chanakya meant. That means the revenue should be more than the expenditure. From another luminary of the west, of the east, Charvak said, Rinam kritva ghritam pibet, which means life should be lived well, even if you have to take alone drink ghee or eat butter. This is what Charvak said. And many centuries after that, Keynes also resonated with a similar thought. Keynes said that to advance and progress, a nation should be spending more than it earns, because that galvanizes the system, also pushes welfare measures, and reduces the friction which can happen because of too much inequality. So Keynes said that, and most of the Western budgets today follow that dictum. Even India is following that dictum, partly by choice, when before 2015, the fiscal deficit was around 3%, and partly by force, because the pandemic has brought it to 6.9%. Not that what Keynes has said has not proven true in the West, not only in modern times, in ancient times also. Pericles, who is known to be one of the greatest rulers the world has had, most enlightened ruler and successful ruler in Greece, Athens, in the 5th century, did something similar to what India is doing today. He focused on visible and hard infrastructural development, and he monetized his assets. There was some treasury lying at foreign lands. There were lands which were owned by the government. He monetized those to set these activities in motion. So there is surely some logic today of having your expenditure a little more than your revenues. May not be 6% more. We need to tighten our purse strings a bit. But as compared to the West, we are not in a very bad space, especially after the pandemic. So this is one important point about the essence, which I draw from Budget 2022. Now, that was the economic side. Now let us look at the political side. The BJP government today rests on 3 pillars. First is welfare or inclusiveness. Visible, hard infrastructure is what the government is pushing. Direct benefit transfers also, but visible, hard infrastructure like roads, ports, power, water, gas, etc. The second is nationalism, which is the echo of which you can hear in Atmanirbhar Bharat. And the third is, let me say, greater probity in life. Surely, on the probity index, this government has shrunk the circle of dishonesty dramatically. There were times in India when we felt that to be an honest person in India is not a viable proposition. It is no longer so. There is greater probity in polity and greater probity in bureaucracy. And those are the 3 pillars on which the government is resting: welfare, nationalism, and perhaps greater probity. The experts were expecting a populist budget due to approaching elections. People were saying 5 states are going to elections, so there'll be a lot of freebies. But that did not happen. Why? In my view, the first reason was the growth is coming back. It might be a post-pandemic rebound, but the government is now too wise not to shake it. This is the second term of the government. And by the second term, most governments understand that if you nudge the economy forward, it moves. But if you push it, it crumbles. So they are once bitten and perhaps twice shy. They don't want to push it too hard. They don't want to shake the train which is coming back on track. That's one of the reasons why I feel it's an incremental budget and not a revolutionary budget. The second thing is the inclusive welfare part is being met in the budget. Why or how? Gati Shakti through roads, railways, ports, and even ropeways. Nal Se Jal, PM Awas Yojana, vibrant village program around the borders. All this is inclusive welfare. And there is some ease of living piece also stitched in through urban planning, e-passports, etc. So that part of the government's, let me say, raison d'etre of inclusive welfare is met. Other than growth and inclusive welfare, what are the main tenets of this budget? Technology, you see digital health, digital payment, drones, infrastructure status for data centers and energy storage systems. All this is technology governed. The other pillar is ecology. So climate change gets a mention, energy storage gets mentioned, green bonds get mentioned, and even solar scheme gets mentioned. And the last pillar is it is aligning India with the world economy. You see the move on logistics. Today, the logistics cost in India is around 14%. In rest of the developing world, it is 18%, 8% only, nearly half. If logistics will improve, productivity goes up, supply side, supply chain eases, there is ease of doing business and ease of moving stuff. We become more competitive. The other thing it is talking about is trust-based governance, which is in alignment with its minimal governance, maximal productivity with minimum governance. And also it is aligning with the world economy by rationalizing some duties, by focusing on PLI schemes, by making sure that India becomes a friend-shoring option for the world. Random offshoring, as you know, has gone. Now people will do business, countries will do business with other countries with whom they are friends for a long time, with whom they share a similar political dispensation, a similar economic framework. And in that space, India is trying to be the China plus one option in Asia for the West. So that is also evident through our stress on climate change, PLI schemes, ease of doing business, ease of living, etc. This is broadly what I would say is the essence of the budget. Coming to some important sectors, which I have not touched already. Agriculture, very important sector for the government because of the fact that it is a big vote bank. So chemical-free natural farming starting with farmers' lands close to the Ganga. very prudently started. Why prudently started? Because you know that when Sri Lanka last year went lock, stock, and barrel to come with a no artificial, no chemical fertilizer policy for whole of its country, and it mandated that crops will be grown with biological fertilizers only, no chemical fertilizers will be used. And it thought that by so doing, their organic farming products will have a ready market in the world and they will become the organic farming bowl of the world. You know what happened? The crops failed and there was a drought-like situation which would have happened, but the government intervened and imported grains from all over the world. And in doing that, it completely bankrupted itself with foreign exchange. So suddenly Sri Lanka had no foreign exchange. So stepwise moving towards this organic farming piece is it signifies prudence on the Indian government side, and I really welcome that. The post-harvest value addition, branding of millet, etc. This is also a very welcome step. India is becoming the bowl of the world. You would have seen that in the Gulf now we are the #1 supplier of grains and crops and food items to several countries. It is to take advantage of this and also bring in standards of high standards which our grains and crops meet by bringing in the technology from Israel, etc. I think it's a part of extension of that, this branding. Use of Kizan drones and Ken and Bethwa link, you already know. In education, the idea of going for a digital university, the digital ecosystem for skilling and livelihood, Desh, is a great idea. And today, Indian teachers in the informal sector are actually setting new standards of teaching in the world. If you will see what kind of teachers, digital teachers are emerging on Unacademy, etc., you will notice that they are more knowledgeable, more updated, and more articulate than many of their Western counterparts coming from the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world. That's the game. And that level of education and quality can be disbursed through the digital arm. And I'm glad the government has increased 20% of the outlay by 20% on the National Education Mission. On health, the rolling out of the Digital Health Mission is great. Telemental health program, very good. India is one of the most depressed nations in the world. In fact, the WHO report ranks India as among the top 3 most depressed nations in the world. And consultations with a psychiatrist or being seen with him in his chamber is still a stigma. So this National Mental Health Program, the digital piece, will help the people who need these consultations get them in privacy and relative anonymity. On the National Health Mission and Pradhan Mantri Swasth Suraksha Yojana, there is a 10% increase. All that is positive. On the promises which are, or on the expectations which are yet to be met, is the rationalization of the GST and rationalization of the tariff structure so that the patient cost overall is reduced. Lastly, on defense, indigenous purchase and opening up of defense R&D for the industry is a very positive move forward. Having said that, the joint venture program will be very important, at least during the time of transition, when we move from little more than 50% to more than 60% of purchases of defense equipment from the country, because that will ensure that the quality is maintained through the legacy of technology which can come into these joint ventures with established players from the West. So this is broadly my comment on the budget. There are several questions I have, and Gautam, if you don't have anything else, I'll go to the questions now.
Surely, sir. Would you like me to ask you the questions one by one?
So Gautam, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So I'll ask you the questions one by one, which you've received till now.
Okay.
The first question being from Mr. Vishal Shah. He's the CEO of Cinesoft Technologies. He's asked, he wants to hear about the MSME specific initiatives. You could just, yeah.
So the biggest initiative here is the extension of the credit guarantee to ECLGS to the SMEs. It has been raised by 50,000 crores to 5 lakh crores. And other than this, there is nothing very substantial except the participation of startups in defense, the digital filing ability and the e-payment also. On the e-procurement side also, there is a good thrust, and that is also bringing greater probity in the purchase process. So this is what I broadly remember are the specific MSME linked incremental changes. Gautam.
Thank you, sir. The next question I would like to go on to is from Mr. J.K. Sharma. He asks, he first says and then he asks, it seems that there is a long-term focus in this budget. However, there are a few immediate problems facing the economy, example, unemployment. So his question is, how can we address such immediate concerns?
It's a very good question. And budget is a long-term document only. So while we are talking about the immediate short term, the tail end of the long term of the budget of last year or yesteryears is manifesting. So for employment generation, you will see in the various Awas Yojana, Atmanirbhar Yojana, Rojgar Yojana, PM Awas Yojana, Rojgar Yojana, Jal Se Nal, all these Yojanas, Manrega, they are continuing, and it will take some time for them to start delivering employment at the scale we need. Another thing which the government has realized is that there is a manpower intensity of every industry. So though this government went in the first term very strongly after value-added manufacturing, it has realized that value-added manufacturing may not be very manpower intensive. So sustaining labor intensive industry and pushing it forward like textiles or leather or handicrafts is very important. And this renewed focus on these areas will make the needle move, I hope, faster. Gautam.
Thank you, sir. So the question which we received earlier have been covered. There's one more question, but I think you've already covered that. I'll jump onto the Q&A section now. We've received one question to a reference which you shared earlier from Mr. BP Banka. He asks, how do you correlate the failure of Sri Lanka on organic farming to the Indian initiative?
So Sri Lankan failure was really very unfortunate, and it happened because we did not look at history properly. If you remember, I think it was during Mao's time in China, the government came out, some bureaucrats came out with a proposal. The proposal was that every year we lose thousands of tons of grains because they are eaten by these sparrows, birds. If we were to kill all the sparrows, then China will be self-sufficient in grains. This idea was advanced and it became a law. Whole of China was now after sparrows, killing sparrows. Those who did not have guns had their catapults, gulails. Those who did not have gulails, they had these big plates of tin and spoons of iron to tire the birds so much by making them fly, they used to fall. Very soon, the sparrow population started sinking. There were hardly any sparrows to be seen. Now the government rejoiced and said, now we will be self-sufficient in grains. What happened? The crops failed because the sparrows were eating the insects, which were much bigger predators for grains than the sparrows themselves. So you did save some grains from being eaten by the sparrows, but the crop completely failed because the grains were eaten by the insects which the sparrows used to devour. This is known as an unintended consequence of ill-informed, maybe well-intentioned policy. And the world is rife with such examples. And again, governments don't see it. And Sri Lankan government, I'm so sorry to say, it's such a beautiful country. I know many very fine people in Sri Lanka. Today, they are not having dollars to import the most critical of medical supplies. So how I correlate their very big blunder with our very well considered baby step of just trying organic farming or chemical-less farming along the banks of Ganges in some areas. This will ensure that we learn our lessons before we go headlong into any such adventure. Have I answered your question, Mr. Banka?
Yes, I think it's very well put across, sir. So before Mr. Banka answers in the chat section, I'll just move on to the next question. Mr. Akshat Gupta has asked around the CapEx point of view. He wants to know what is the CapEx the government is targeting in this new budget?
So I don't remember the exact figure, but there is a significant increase. I think it's about something 11,000 crores or something like that. I don't remember the exact figure, but please do look into the budget, Gautam, and let Mr. Gupta know what exactly it is.
Sorry, sir. I'll move on to the next question, and it's a two-part question by Mr. Riaz Desai. He's asked first, how do you think this budget will help the medical device space? And second is, are there any provisions to push innovation, especially when India is poised to become a potential alternative to China for the Western world?
So there is a very strong emphasis of the government on innovation. It has already come out with production-linked schemes. It is being asked to come out by the industry through research-linked schemes. And if that happens, then that will be a very strong step forward. How does this budget, how will it help the medical device space? Well, the PM Swasth Suraksha Yojana, as well as the Swachh Bharat piece, are all moving forward. There is an incremental growth in these sectors, and this should increase the consumption of medical devices. There is, specifically for medical devices, we don't see much this time, but there is a realization, it seems, that some rationalization of tariffs needs to be done. The digitalization of the medical space will not happen without the help of medical devices. And whether it is the home medical devices or the health IT, these spaces are likely to grow very fast, because hospitals in future are likely to be distributed across the urban tissue, become smaller. Home healthcare, which is a fraction, which comes at a fraction of the cost of hospital-based healthcare, is now here to stay. Elderly people wish to stay at home in familiar surroundings, even when they are ill. Digital health has really opened up possibilities of remote monitoring, and all that cannot happen without the help of medical devices, diagnostics, etc. So because of digitalization, I see a very good growth coming in this area. Gautam.
Thank you, sir. There's a question from Mr. Umanit Nayak, but before that, I'll just like to say that the capex which the government is targeting is around 7.5 lakh crores, which is to about 35% and up by 2.9% from last year's capex.
Yeah, sorry, I got the figure wrong. It was this capex is 7.5 lakh crores from 5 lakh crores, 37% increase. What you're saying is correct. And also part of it will not, this delta will not be completely come into capex only, because green bonds, etc., are going to be introduced. So, but a significant portion of this delta should be the incremental capex.
Thank you. So moving on to our next question from Umanit Nayak. He asked, increase in import duties on some items has been flagged as a protectionist measure by some experts. What is your view on this?
So, increase in import duties for products which cannot be made in the short term in India to the level of quality which the Indian consumer expects, at the cost which the Indian consumer is used to pay, can surely be seen as over-protectionist. Sometimes it happens because of a very active lobby, a very active lobby in any country can make the government increase duties even when it is not ready to manufacture those products up to the import quality and around the import price, then surely it is a protectionist measure which hurts the consumer. And again, history is rife with examples of how the overall economy is hurt when that happens. And the latest example was that of Russia. Indian example was also there before 1990s. It was very difficult to get many of the products which are now available in India at costs which can be afforded by Indian customer. It was very difficult to get those products. And that led to a lot of smuggling, which means government loses the exchequer. Also, the consumer is saddled with products which do not have adequate legal and service guarantees. So these are all the dangers of an over-protectionist approach by increasing import duties prematurely, which is why you see in China. In China, they have reduced custom duties on many medical products from 4%, which was a very low sum. In India, it's roughly, the total comes to about 15%. From 4%, they reduced it to 3.3% to also inject competition, because the domestic industry was becoming lethargic through the import duty protection. Many a time, the walls which we build around us to protect ourselves actually imprison us. And that happens in such cases.
Thank you, sir. I think we've come to the very end and we've actually crossed our time limit as well. It was such an insightful session and engaging, and a privilege to hear you. And I'm sure our guests and I have been hooked on to the very end, and I've taken home several nuggets from today's session. And thank you.
And I also enjoyed answering some very good questions. So thank you very much, Gautam, and thank you all those who attended.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the very end, and for always sharing excellent questions. Thank you.
Bye.